Ezra Levant here. I'm at the courthouse in Lethbridge, a different part of the building because it's a little bit noisy out front where I normally stand. I've been inside the court all morning. We are in the pre-trial hearings for the trial of the Coots Four. Those are four men charged with very serious offenses emanating from the trucker blockade at the Coots border crossing in 2022. A couple of weeks ago, as you know, two of the men pled guilty to relatively minor charges. There are two men who are proceeding to trial. The subject matter of these preliminary hearings today is an application by the defendants to have the judge throw out the search warrant, or more to the point, the fruits of that search warrant, what they found when they executed the search warrant. So all day yesterday and this morning today, the defendants' lawyers were arguing that the information to obtain that search warrant was not proper, and that even if the search warrant itself was properly obtained, it was not properly executed. There was a lot of talk about case law and a lot of talk about things that unfortunately I can't describe because they're subject to a publication ban. Details that the defendants claim were inappropriately addressed by the police. Let me just leave it that way. This information will likely come out either if the court throws out the search warrant or if it proceeds to trial and the evidence brought out by the search warrant is allowed in. It's difficult being in court hearing details, some of which are fascinating, some of which are a little bit shocking, some of which are frankly a little bit salacious, and not being able to talk about them simply because to do so, you can understand, could prejudice the trial before it happens because these are just untested accusations by the police. But that said, the judge was very attentive, and there was one police officer who signed the information to obtain. He's called an affiant. That's a legal term, the person who swears this is true. It was interesting. He was an RCMP officer based in Calgary. It was interesting to hear how the police go about putting together an information to obtain, because of course there's so many police who were involved with the Coots blockade, some wearing uniforms, many of them undercover. They had conversations with the accused and then they took notes, and the process was outlined. It was very interesting. And it was interesting to hear that the affiant's role, the final signer, is sort of like the final check and balance on what the police are going to take to the court. And they claim, and we'll see if the judge agrees, that because the other side is not there, because it's an ex parte hearing, a secret hearing really, because the search warrant is a kind of ambush, you don't want to tell the other side you're doing it in advance, that to go to court you have to be full and frank and fair, is the phrase they use. You have to say a little bit of the other side of the story. You have to say what the defense would say if they were allowed to be there, because otherwise you're withholding evidence from a judge that would have been useful. So the question is, was the information to obtain fair? Was it a full, frank, and fair summary of the investigation? And the search warrant that emanated from that, was it properly executed? The affiant, the cop who gathered it all together and signed it, answered questions in cross-examination for not quite an hour. And frankly, I thought he was very credible. He didn't seem evasive. He was quite candid, including candid about things that may be problems for the prosecutor. Then the prosecutor, Stephen Johnson, the same one who's targeted other lockdown dissenters over the years, he vociferously asked the judge to bar questions of the next more senior cop. And after a lengthy back and forth with the judge ruled no, we will allow that senior cop to be cross-examined. And there was a feeling in the gallery that this was a good win for the defense because of reasons I can't actually describe, but it could lead to the search warrant or the information to obtain that search warrant being thrown out. And the judge seemed to be taking it seriously. I mean, that's quite a dramatic thing to have a search warrant thrown out and all the fruits of the poison tree, as they say, thrown out with it. If that were to happen, that would throw this case into a great disarray. It could likely mean the staying of proceedings against at least one of the defendants. And even if only one of the defendants is let go, that leaves a single defendant. How do you have a conspiracy charge with one person? These are heavy matters, and the judge seems to be attentive to it. I have a frustration because I'm hearing so many things and I can't share them. That's the nature of publication bans, I suppose, and I understand why they're there. So I'm going to stick around this afternoon and listen to the examination of the senior cop. And I want to tell you that we've been talking to our larger Rebel News team, and we're going to assign Robert Kraychik to cover the Coots 4, the Coots 3, the various Coots trials, because Robert's proven himself to be a great trucker lawyer journalist. He's not a lawyer himself, but he's a journalist covering trucker law. He's covered the Tamara Leach case every day in Ottawa, really understanding the beat. And in that case in Ottawa with Tamara Leach, he's really learned firsthand how abusive of the system and how false prosecutions can be. They're certainly putting Tamara Leach through the ringer out there. I think it's an atrocious trial. It's taken many months. It should be a day at most. I think that's excellent training for Robert, and to have him out here in Alberta, I think would be great. I will come out here from time to time too, of course. I'm very interested in these matters, but I don't think I'm in a position to come to the trial every single day. Luckily, we have Robert, who's done a great job of that. So that's my midday update from here in Lethbridge. I guess I'll leave one more thing, and it's more a personal comment. So there's, as I mentioned, there's a lot of different people in the court. The court has a small courtroom, which nobody likes because that leaves most of the people out in the hallway. They're interested in this case, and the court has assigned a fairly small room to it. If these people feel it's unfair, and it just compounds their feeling that the establishment is against them in large and small ways. I chat with people in the hallway in the break, and it's interesting. Obviously, the family is motivated by their love for their family members, and that is an incontrovertible, immutable love. Even if someone in your family is charged with a crime, you're going to stand by them. You're going to root for them. You're going to say they didn't do it. And that's family. That's what family is for, and friends also. There's also other members in the community a little bit further out from the center of the bullseye. The center would be their spouse and parents, and then their extended family and their friends. But there's other people in the community who are interested too. And the Coots 4, as they're called, are being touted as a unit. In fact, if you look at the bumper sticker that's on some of the cars here, they talk about the Coots 4 arrested together, defending together. But I've learned over the last few days that's actually not how it is. Jerry Moran, one of the Coots 4, never actually was in Coots, at least not according to the two journalists we had in the blockade the whole time and the lawyers we had there. They say they never saw him there. In fact, he was arrested in his vehicle near Calgary. And he was one of the two who signed a guilty plea. He, in his statement of facts, said he agreed to take guns to the blockade. Now, again, he may have been signing that under duress. If you were in jail for 2 years, you'd sign pretty much anything, I suppose, to get out. But if he was indeed found with guns, and if he did indeed agree to bring guns to a blockade, what was he thinking? Were you going to have an armed shootout with the RCMP? I mean, the RCMP are better trained, they're better armed. It's a fool's errand. It's a suicide run. But let's say you're successful and you have a little revolution there with, truckers with muskets or whatever you have, shotguns. You don't think that's going to be crushed by more police or the army or something? Like, what's the game plan there? To agree to smuggle firearms to a peaceful blockade. What you're doing is you're sentencing anyone who touches those to harsh police consequences or prosecutorial consequences, and indeed, that's what happened. And if you were successful, God forbid, for arming these men, to what end? Would they be slaughtered? God forbid. Or would the police be slaughtered? God forbid. And more to the point of the protest, the strength of the protest was its moral cleanliness, was its moral high ground, that these were peaceful protesters engaging in civil disobedience. There was no violence. That was the whole success of it. What kind of a man would agree to bring guns to a peaceful protest that, by the way, was surrounded by cops? And so you don't have to say that Jerry Moran deserved 2 years in prison. I don't think he did. And you don't have to say that Jerry Moran wasn't overcharged. I think he was. But I think part of something I've detected here is that in the solidarity for the men and the opposition to the overcharging, there's a celebration of things that, frankly, aren't good. That's the reason why Rebel News was very cautious 2 years ago about crowdfunding these very serious charges. As you know, this week I decided, after meeting with Chris Carbert, one of the 4 accused, that we were going to crowdfund his case, but keep it a separate crowdfund so that people who only want to defend civil liberties battles don't chip into it. If you want to help Chris, go to helpchris.ca. But there are other things I heard that I'm not at liberty to say because of the publication ban. These 4 men are not a unit. These 4 men don't have the same case against them. In fact, these 4 men are, in some cases, facing different charges. And they're called the Coots 4 because there's 4 of them. There's also the Coots 3 and the Coots 5. But there's 55 men altogether that I know of that Rebel News and the Democracy Fund are defending, plus others. It's close to 60. But they're not a unit. But because people were so supportive of the blockade and so opposed to the lockdowns and so appalled by the overreach of the prosecution and the police, they've sort of lumped together all 4 men as heroes. I don't think they are. They're not saints. I don't think it's saintly to say, I agree to bring guns to a police standoff. I think that's very serious. And I'm not saying Jerry Moran deserved 2 years in prison for that, but I'm saying if indeed he did do that, and he said he did, that's not a saint. Anyone who brings guns to a blockade surrounded by police is looking to escalate things, perhaps is even an agent provocateur. So Rebel News is going to continue to cover this trial with great interest, and we're going to follow the facts wherever they lead. And I hope that the 2 remaining accused are acquitted, not because I have a personal affection for them, but because I hope they didn't do it. And I hope that the police overcharge and the prosecutorial overcharge is revealed. But we will follow the facts wherever they lead. And I think that there are some activities that I've heard about directly in court and that we now know because of the 2 plea deals that are not salutary. Rebel News believes in peaceful protest, in civil disobedience, in minor offenses like mischief. We don't believe in doing those things, but if someone like Tamara Leach is charged with mischief, which is technically a crime, of course we're going to defend her, because that's just what police are throwing anything in the wall to make it sick. Of course we're going to help people like that. But people who say, yes, I agree to bring guns to an armed standoff, no. And I sort of wish that the people who are so passionate in the courtroom there, that they just can't bring themselves to say it was wrong to agree to bring guns to a standoff with police. I think they need to give their head a shake. I think they've gone too down the rabbit hole, too far down. I guess that's my remarks for today. We will hear the senior officer cross-examined later today. But again, I really won't be able to say much of it. That's my report from here. This is a terrible thing, and this is the residue of the worst thing that's happened in a generation. The pandemic wasn't the worst thing that happened in a generation. The pandemic was a bad flu season in terms of its mortality. But the lockdowns and the authoritarianism and the abusive policing and the outrageous health orders, you can only have so many people at your funeral or your wedding, only so many people over to your house for Christmas dinner. That was the worst thing that happened to us in a quarter century or more. And this trial and the fact that men have been in jail for years, and the fact that many more are being put through the legal process, that is the ugly legacy of the lockdowns in Alberta and around the country. And by the way, in Alberta, they were amongst the most punitive. For all of my reports, go to truckertrial.com. It's 2:20 p.m., but the court is done. Here in Lethbridge, Alberta, the pretrial hearings for the Coots 4 were suddenly adjourned when a senior police witness failed to show up. The reason the police officer was required is because the defendant lawyers were going to cross-examine this senior officer about the information to obtain a search warrant that was sworn by police 2 years ago. The defendants are challenging the validity of the search warrant and the way it was executed. They had the judge's agreement to cross-examine the senior officer who simply didn't show up. Maybe they'll be there tomorrow morning when the court resumes at 9 a.m. Until then, well, another busy half day of work at the courthouse here in Lethbridge. For all of our coverage on the Coots 4, the Coots 3, the Coots 5, and all other blockade and Coots-oriented coverage, go to truckertrial.com.